Joining me now is the man I quote often and listen to even more often, Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and the co-host of the indispensable Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast. Also with me is Clark Cunningham, a professor of law and ethics at Georgia State University. Andrew, I just know from our pre-conversation that you see this maybe slightly differently than I do. How much peril do you think this election conspiracy case is in?
Not a lot. I mean, I think I really meant what I had sort of tweeted out, which is if you think about where we were before this filing, the intimation that was made by defendant Mike Roman was that you had a boyfriend who was incompetent, who was hired by Fani Willis solely because of that relationship. And then they were sort of, the way they were going Dutch is that the profits of getting this contract were then split and she was getting this money. That was the look of the allegations. And the response, and obviously there can be a hearing and we'll see what comes out of this, but the response with a signed affidavit from Wade that was submitted today is that none of that is true. So I think at this point, people might be nibbling around the edges, but you know, there's a sworn affidavit that there was no relationship at the time. There's a sworn affidavit, which seems really strong to me about his qualifications. And there, I just want to point out, no lawyer is perfect. You are building a team. I have been in that situation where when I've been hired, I've told the person hiring me, like, just so you know, this is what I'm not good at.
Right.
And they're trying to pick somebody who can fit with other people. But I thought that was a really strong part. And then they said they roughly divided everything. So I just thought that the main thrust of what was being exposed, which to me is not that there's a relationship. That happens. That's not the issue. It's the issue of hiring somebody, either profiteering or hiring the person because of that relationship. And so I thought the main thrust, again, if there's no contrary evidence and this is the record, I think this is very much attempts in a teapot in terms of the legal issue that's before this judge. I think the defendant has no right to complain about it. You know, whether they're ethics issues, whether all of the sort of I's were dotted and T's were crossed, there may be something there. But to me, the sort of main thrust of this seemed really it looked like a mountain out of a molehill.
Professor Cunningham, I know that you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and I'd love to read an excerpt of it, where you said, I believe the judicious and far-sighted course would be for Ms. Willis to take a personal leave of absence and turn over control of the district attorney's office and the case against Mr. Trump to a career deputy district attorney. Now, that was before this filing came out today, and I wonder if there's anything in it in terms of her explanation of things, her defense, if you will, that changes your mind.
Well, with all respect to your other guest, reading this response and I would say, very vague and evasive affidavit filed by Nathan Wade strengthens my opinion that she should take a temporary leave of absence from the office and turn it over to a career prosecutor. I think that there's a lot that the Trump defendants can work with here. And I think it's way too early to make any predictions about what the ultimate outcome of the disqualification motion is going to be. I've said that before. I say that now. But let me point out one thing that's pretty clear just from what's been filed. So we've seen Mr. Roman's lawyer filed something late this afternoon. She finally got evidence that Mr. Wade spent about $3,800 at the beginning of November 2022 to pay for both of them to take a 3-day luxury trip to Aruba. They came back from Aruba, and at that point, he did not have a contract. His contract had expired. They together signed a new contract right after coming back from Aruba. She personally signed it. He personally signed it. I cannot understand, if she was in a romantic relationship with this man as a public official, why she would be signing a contract, an outside contract, with someone that she's in a relationship with. And then that contract gave her the authority to allow him to go over monthly limits. And the next year, she did it month after month after month. He collected at least $30,000 more than the cap, and she apparently personally approved it. So I don't see these filings as resolving issues at all. Again, I'm not prejudging whether she would be disqualified, but I do think the defendants still have a lot to work with to argue that she had a financial stake in the amount of money he was getting paid as outside counsel.
I can't get into the receipts.
Yeah.
And I absolutely trust that Professor Cunningham has looked at Mike Roman's lawyer's filing judiciously. But I'm sure there is going to be some amount of back and forth about all of this.
Yep.
I go to the Burt Jones case where it's, there's the legal question and then there's the ethical question. And the fact of the matter is, as distasteful as all this may be, this is the highest profile case, maybe in certainly in this DA's lifetime, maybe in Georgia state history, going after a former president on charges of election conspiracy, a RICO charge against a president. And I just wonder, is there some merit to, as Professor Cunningham suggests, basically taking a leave of absence, which would not scuttle the broader case and would turn it over to someone else in her office?
So I think I agree with the professor that it is useful to await the hearing and the full facts, in the same way that I found that the filing today was informative and changed my view. I was concerned about the idea of hiring somebody while you were in a relationship. I'm less concerned about the idea that the contract continued, because these were 6-month contracts. But I do think, let's wait for the hearing. I do not think that there should be an overreaction of saying, oh, if there's an appearance, you should withdraw. I've been in those kinds of cases. I've worked for Robert Mueller. I have seen high-profile cases and the kinds of allegations and spurious allegations that are made. This comes up a lot of times when people ask judges to recuse because of an appearance of impropriety. And usually really good judges, their first instinct is, you know what, I don't want any question. I'm happy to recuse. And then they think,
unless
wait
it's Clarence Thomas. I'm sorry, it had to be said.
Okay, true. I did put a caveat on how I phrased that. But then judges think about, wait a second, that is not how you can run a system, that you don't just recuse every time somebody raises an issue. There really has to be a legal standard. It has to be met. You cannot let one side or the other use gamesmanship. And so if this turns out to be something where, yes, she had a personal relationship with somebody in an office after they were hired, that to me is not a reason to recuse. I would note, just to the professor's point, that one thing that is at least alleged by the Fani Wallace submission is that every receipt, all of the payments had to be approved by the chief financial officer of Fulton County. I was looking for exactly that kind of thing. What kind of
safeguards?
Exactly. If you're having that relationship, what are you putting in place? That doesn't mean there could be more to it, to the professor's point. I do think it is useful to have a hearing on this, but I do think this is a much more complicated situation, and people should not be saying, oh, the better way to deal with this is just to recuse. I think that you cannot run a system that way.
Professor Cunningham, there's the sort of legal avenues here. There are also political avenues here. The Georgia State Legislature has their committees and their panels that are going to be investigating this. Can you talk a little bit about the climate in and around this case in the state of Georgia and sort of, please, the mic is yours.
Yeah, I'm going to add that, though. Let me add a footnote to what Andrew just said, and that is my suggestion is in many ways strategic. I'm an expert on how these things go in Georgia, and we're looking at months of delay, I would say, even if she ultimately prevails, months of delay. And right now, we've just found out that the D.C. case has been taken off the March schedule. There's an opportunity for the Georgia DA's office maybe just to sever Donald Trump, try him alone, and jump into this space that's in the spring right now and give the whole nation a televised trial right away before the general election. I think that's incredibly valuable. And Fani Willis could make that happen if she made this disqualification motion go away, which she could do right now if she took a leave of absence. So it's a strategic point. I appreciate Andrew saying prosecutors don't want to be chased around by accusations, but DA Willis is smart enough to realize that this is going to go on for a while. It's not going to be resolved February 15th. Now, in terms of what's going on here, I think there are a lot of other problems that could cause DA Willis to be removed. We have a new prosecuting attorneys qualifications commission that's about to get into business. There's going to be a complaint filed against her. I'm quite sure they're going to investigate her. There's this committee that's been formed by the state Senate. And, I mentioned the invoices before. I just have to say, I've been a legal ethics expert for decades. These are just about the worst billing invoices I have ever seen. And I don't have anything against Nathan Wade, but the state, they should not have been paying him on these invoices. He submitted invoices for like $10,000 for a week of work. He said 40 hours, and that was it. I've never seen invoices like this. And again, it makes you suspicious about them being approved by someone who's in a relationship with him. The new investigative committee of the state Senate is going to dig into this. And I think it's possible, I'm just speculating, but I think it's possible they're going to find out he overbilled, which, ask Andrew, but that's arguably wire fraud. So this is not going to go away. I think it's just going to get worse as long as DA Willis continues, as she did today, to fight really in a pretty rough way.
Andrew Weissman, Professor Clark Cunningham, thank you both
Pleasure
so
to be
much
with
for
you
your
this
time
evening.
tonight. Appreciate it.